Fenris and Garm, two very prominent wolves in Norse mythology. Are they the same? Are they different? What is the mythological symbolism behind both of these very important animals in Norse mythology? Stay tuned, I'm going to talk about it. Hi, this is Michael William Denny of the ThunderWizard.com YouTube channel. Welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about the differences between the wolf Fenris and the wolf/hound Garm. Now, some people have, if you read some things online, cursory search online, somebody might say that Fenris and Garm are the same being. And again, it's so important that you have the ability to know how to interpret mythology. You've got to look at beyond just surface associations. You got to go beyond the superficial in order to understand mythology. If I haven't made it clear recently, my belief is that from a shamanic perspective, mythology is not just some cute story made up by a human being. Mythology, if it's true mythology, it is a holographic truth teaching that is downloaded through human beings. So it's actually channeled. Whoever first comes up with these stories or writes them down are people who are channeling information from the gods. And the gods are bringing holographic truths to human beings that, if you know how to interpret them, will teach you specific ways that you can increase your evolutionary status, that it'll teach you things about meditation, about shamanism, about ritual, about energy, about your emotions, psychology. If you understand it, you can use this information to evolve spiritually. So I'm going to talk to you about both of these beings. I'm going to talk to you about what their differences are and what they mean. Now, I'm about to start a series on Ragnarok. And that's because we're getting into this time of the winter where, everything is going inward. And what happens when things go inward is especially if you live in northern cold latitudes, it's dark, it's snowy, you're inside all the time. That's when your mind starts going with fears. That's when people sat down and talked about mythology. And especially before we get to the winter solstice. After that, we start looking towards hope and regeneration. But before we get to there, as we're coming in that, the fears start to come in, and so we have to look at those. And that's what mythology is about. So that's why I'm going to be talking about Ragnarok. Anyway, these two animals figure very prominently in Ragnarok because Odin is swallowed, is killed by Fenris at Ragnarok, and Tyr and Garm kill each other during Ragnarok. So right there, that shows us that they can't be the same animal, because if they were, we wouldn't have two different gods fighting them if they were the same animal. If Fenris were both Garm and Fenris, there would be no need for that. So that gets rid of that. But there are other reasons, and I want to talk to you about it. So first, let's talk about Fenris. Fenris is the child of Loki and the giantess Angerbod. And Angerbod means she who carries anger. So again, the thing about Loki is that Loki is the agent of evolution. But what he does is he uses our challenges, our limitations, our negativity, and turns it around and uses it to help us evolve. If you understand that and you go back and read the myths about Loki, you'll see he's not an evil mischief maker. You'll see he's actually the only one that can help the gods evolve. Without Loki, the gods wouldn't have all of their magical tools. Odin wouldn't have Sleipnir. Thor wouldn't have his hammer. If it weren't for Loki, none of the gods would have their magical items. So now we have to ask, why is Loki creating children with she who carries anger? So that means that what happens is we have this anger within us that we carry. And giants almost always represent the negative things that cause static lack of growth in our lives. And so Loki is the agent of change. And so that means Loki's using these negativities within us to create change. So the offspring of our anger and Loki's desire to create change within us are a bunch of negative beings. One of them is Fenris. Fenris, his name means he who dwells in the fen. The fen is the marshes. What are marshy places? Places that are inundated with water, places that sometimes floods come in and flood the place. Now, in mythology, water always represents the emotions that arise out of our instinctual drives and desires. When our instinctual drives and desires are out of control, we emotionally are out of control. So Fenris is a being that is connected to our emotions, that are connected to our instinctual drives. Okay? So the lower aspect of ourselves. So that's important to know, because Fenris does not live in the marshes. Fenris grows up in Asgard as a cute little puppy. The gods raise him in Asgard until they figure out that he's going to be a problem, and then out of fear they trick him into being bound, and then they imprison him under the earth until Ragnarok comes, when he breaks free and gets his revenge on the gods. So let's talk about that. Oh, by the way, Fenris also has another nickname, and his other name is Fame Wolf. And you see in the myth that he's very interested in his fame. So right there, that tells us that he has a strong connection to our ego. So what the gods find out very quickly is that Fenris's mouth is so big that he could swallow up the whole universe. What does that tell you? It tells you that our ego, that our desire for fame is insatiable. And it is so insatiable, we will destroy our lives getting it. And so the gods, who represent the highest purity of ourselves, are seeing that they act as a mediating force. They keep that in check. They don't kill it. People ask the gods, well, why don't you just kill him? And they say, well, we can't do that because we can't spill blood in Asgard. You know, that would be an unholy act. We don't spill blood here. This is a sacred place. So that tells you that you're not meant to get rid of your ego, which a lot of religions tell you you're supposed to do out of context. You're supposed to keep it in check. And if you keep it in check, here's what happens. When Fenris is bound up and Tyr puts a sword in his mouth, he tries to clamp down his jaws and take the gods out because he's being tied up and he doesn't like it. When you hold his mouth open, then what happens is that his saliva creates the river of hope. Again, we've got emotions. He's connected to water. He's connected to emotions. But when you have your ego bottled up in a way that works for you well, then what you get from that is hope. That's the meaning behind this. So now let's talk about how do they bind him up. So very quickly, the myth goes like this, that Loki's little wolf pup child is growing up in Asgard, and he's really cute, and Tyr feeds him, and then all of a sudden he's starting to get bigger and bigger, and his mouth is so big he swallows up, you know, he could swallow up the whole world. The gods start getting scared. They know they got to do something about it. So they're afraid of him. This is how powerful the ego is. The ego has the power to swallow up all that is righteous and godly and spiritual within you. The gods are smart. They know this can happen. So they come to Fenris and they realize they got to bind him. So they bring this big chain. They're going to bind him up with this big chain, and they appeal to his ego because he's Fame Wolf. And they say, hey, if we tie you up with this chain and you break out of it, do you realize how much fame you would gain from that? And Fenris says, yeah, I would gain a lot of fame from that. Go ahead, tie me up. So they tie him up, and he breaks out of that chain. Unbelievable. The gods are floored. They almost can't believe what they're seeing. So this time they get a rope, a really strong rope, and they tie him up, and he breaks out of that rope. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So they realize they got to get some magical help. So they go to the dwarves. And the dwarves create a very thin thread, which is called Gleipnir. Gleipnir means open. So the interesting thing about that, the irony here, is that being open is what will bind up your ego. Not being closed-minded, but being open-minded. Now, there are other things about this rope that are very interesting. They're made up of things that on the surface seem impossible, but actually exist, but they exist on such a subtle or profound level that we don't see them with our senses. And let me see if I got this right. It's made of the footfalls of a cat. It's made of the beard of a woman. It's made of the roots of a mountain. It's made of the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spit of a bird. Now, all of these things on the surface seem impossible, but in reality, they all exist. I mean, cats' feet do make sound when they walk on the ground, but you'd have to be listening very closely, have a very high-powered microphone. Otherwise, you can't hear it. But it still doesn't mean that they don't exist. The sound does exist. It's just very subtle. Same thing with the beard of a woman. Women, ideally, don't have beards, but you know, even the ones that don't have any hair on their face, if you look very closely, they're very tiny little hairs all over the body. So the beard is there. It's just incredibly subtle. We just can't see or feel the beard when we look for it, but it's still there. The sinews of a bear. Bears have sinew just like every other animal, but when you look at the bear from the outside, all you see is all this fur and this fat and this muscle. I mean, you see him running, it just sort of the fat and the fur bounces around. You can't see the sinew, but it's still there. You just got to look for it. The roots of a mountain. Mountains obviously have roots, very deep roots, but you can't see them by looking at it. That means you have to be very profound as well as subtle. The what else? The breath of a fish. Fish do breathe. They breathe water, but if you take them out of the water and try to get them to breathe on you, nothing's going to happen. They don't use lungs. So you don't see that there's any breath, but they do breathe. Very, very subtly. The spit of a bird. If you know anything about the mouths of birds, if you've ever owned a bird, you know that their tongue is completely dry. There's no spit in there. That doesn't mean that birds don't digest their food. It just means that they don't have spit in the way we understand. So these are very subtle. You can't look at the surface. So what this means is that subtlety, profundity, and open-mindedness is what binds up the ego. You need the ego because when the ego is bound up properly, it gives us hope. We have to have an ego. We can't function without it. That's why they don't kill it. So that's Fenris. Fenris, we'll put him aside for a moment. Now we'll look at Garm. Garm is said to be, depending on the source, either a wolf or a hound. Now Garm is in hell, and Garm is said to be the worst of monsters. That means he's worse than Fenris. Fenris has the ability to swallow the entire universe. What could be worse than that? Well, Fenris can be used. If you bind up Fenris in the proper way and allow your ego to function properly, it gives you hope, gives you strength. You look forward to life. Your ego is what drives you to create and to do and to achieve, which is what you have to do in this life. Garm is the worst of monsters. Garm is in hell. Now, the word Garm means rag. This takes on a more meaning when we understand more descriptions about Garm. Garm is said to be covered in blood. What rag is covered in blood? You see where I'm going with this? Now we have to look at the generalized negative stereotypes about this issue. In many shamanic cultures, when a woman is having her time of the month, they're not allowed to interact with the men. They're not allowed to touch any of the men's weapons or hunting tools because they will curse it or damage it. You know, men aren't supposed to touch women. You're not supposed to, lie with a woman during that time. It will defile you. There's all kinds of negative attachments to it. I'm not agreeing one way or another, ladies. Don't take this personally. We're just talking mythological symbology here. So we're talking about, and again, let's look at what happens. What happens during this physical, normal, monthly thing that happens is that the blood is there to support a child. So the blood comes to that part of the body waiting to nurture a child. If the egg is not fertilized, then all of that blood is now useless for that purpose and is excreted. But let's look at it on an even deeper level. One of the deepest drives of human beings is to have children. And so oftentimes, especially in times past, women really had a strong desire to have a children, and their whole value as a person, right or wrongly, was attached to their ability to give birth. And so all of that energy that going to create a child is lost. There's all this sadness and despair. It's more than just unfulfilled desire. It's this it can be connected to desires that we're so deeply connected to who we are attached to them. It goes into the underworld. So what is in the underworld? People in the underworld are people who have died in illness as opposed to dying in battle. And the shamanic understanding of that is people who are in the underworld are people who died with strong emotional attachments to something that they didn't get in life. They wanted something, they wanted to achieve something, and they didn't get it, and it affected them so intensely, they were so attached to it, it drove them down into the underworld, and then the goddess Hela works with them to look at that, to come back up and try again. But the way down, which he's at the entrance to hell, which means as you're going into hell, you have to face all of the sadness, all of the despair of what you didn't get in this life. And so the myths are saying that is the worst of all monsters, to have despair and regret and that empty hole inside of you that you can never fill, you never satisfied. It's just a horrible place to be. So now we can see that these are two very different beings, even though they're called wolves and or hound. Now, that is why, at the end, one fights with Odin, because Odin is void of all ego. That's what makes him Odin. Odin is he who is consumed with the rage of shamanic ecstasy. You can't have any ego when that's going on. So Odin is swallowed up by ego, by Fenris, the Fame Wolf. Garm fights with Tyr. Tyr represents the highest awareness, represents justice. And so those who worship Tyr ideally get this very high awareness, spiritual awareness. So Garm is the exact opposite, which is pure attachment to the illusion of what it is you thought you wanted to gain in life, but you couldn't, and how that's torturing your soul. And so Tyr and that essence fight with each other and they kill each other. So we're going to talk more about this. We're going to talk more about Ragnarok. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. If you like this channel, please go ahead and support the channel. If you don't see the thing above, scroll below where it says support this channel. Subscribe, like, comment, leave any questions that you have. And feel free to please watch more of these videos. I'm gonna try and get more of this stuff out before we get into Ragnarok, so that when I get there, the idea is you will see how all of this comes together and the profundity of what Ragnarok really means. It can be a very enlightening subject. So that's it for now, my friends. Until next time, remember that regret and ego are seeking to destroy you. The way that you overcome it is with open-mindedness, subtlety, and profundity. That's it for now.